The first game that we're going to be looking at is between Fabiano Caruana and Praggnanandhaa. Fabi starts the game off with c4, knight f6, knight f3, e6 and b3. A little bit of a sideline chosen by Fabi, perhaps avoiding some sort of preparation or trying to avoid theoretical battle against Praggnanandhaa, playing something a little offbeat. d5, bishop b2, c5, c takes d5, e takes d5, and g3. White is opting for a double fianchetto kind of setup, after the bishop goes to g2. Knight c6, bishop g2, d4, shutting down the diagonal of the bishop on b2, with the pawn on d4. Short castles, bishop e7, knight a3, white knight wants to jump to c4. Black castles, knight goes to c4, bishop goes to e6 putting pressure on the knight on c4, and pawn goes to e3. Up to this point, Fabi has been blitzing out his move. Perhaps this is some sort of preparation or a known territory for him, and this was the first moment he spent around 20 minutes while thinking if he should take on d4 or not. White had another option of playing the move knight f2 e5, which could have been interesting, but Fabi decided to go e takes d4 cd4 and played the move rook e1, taking the open file on the e file. Bishop went to c5, knight goes to e5 now, putting pressure on the c6 knight, and black takes this knight on c4, giving up the bishop pair at this point. White goes knight takes c6, black responds b takes c6, and white goes queen to c2, skewering the two bishops. White could have recaptured the bishop on c4 instead, but wanted to keep his pawn structure intact and played this move instead. So, took the bishop on c5, and the bishop drops to d5, offering a trade. White takes on d4 and the material is pretty even, and Praggnanandhaa doesn't want to give up his pawn on a7, therefore he just played the move a6 defending it. Queen goes to c4 attacking the pawn once again. c5 threatening the bishop, and after bishop takes, queen takes on d2. Queen d4 offering a trade. The queens were swapped off, and the players soon made the draw by repetition, and this was a very solid draw for Fabi, keeping his lead since the rest of the games were drawn as well. Next game that we're going to be looking at is between Alireza Firouzja playing with the white pieces against Jan Nepomniachtchi. The game started off with a London once again. Alireza has been playing the London occasionally here and there, trying to perhaps show some interesting ideas in this opening. Jan plays knight c6, knight d2, and knight h5, a slightly rare move, but it's a very, very interesting move from the black side, trying to go for the bishop pair, and indeed getting it very quickly. And here, Jan played this move a5, which is a slightly less played move that caught Alireza with no surprise actually. He played the move bishop b5 very quickly, and after e6, knight e5, bishop d7, knight takes, and then queen went to f3, queen c7, and then long castle. So this was the first thing that Alireza has done. He was perhaps expecting maybe the move bishop takes c5, or not, because this would be met by queen c3, and that would lead to a double attack. Or maybe this was his preparation, I'm not sure, because queen d6, maybe black has some compensation for the pawn that's being sacrificed on g7. So Nepo definitely knew this position. He played queen c7 relatively quickly and then played bishop e7 very quickly as well. And white goes f5, trying to start a attack against the black king that was not castled. So now it's finally castled, and queen goes to g3, offering a trade. And this was the first moment Nepo started thinking a little bit, but he played queen takes g3, swapped the queens, and played the move knight to d4, attacking the bishop as well as the pawn on f5. The bishop dropped back to d3, and black finally grabbed the pawn back. And we have a opposite color bishop, middle game, and almost like an endgame, because the queens are off the board. We can just say it's a queenless middle game type of position. The knight dropped back, knight went to f3, trying to go to g5, and then attack these two pawns. But black plays the move g6, prophylactic against knight to g5, and played the move bishop to d6. So the idea is that if white were to take this pawn with the knight, then black responds with a knight to e5 and attacking the knight, and if the knight retreats back to g5, then knight takes d3 would win the game. So knight takes e6 would be a very bad move, therefore it was not played. Rook takes e6 is the correct response. A few pawns were traded off, and black is trying to push for the win in this position, but white is remaining solid, and eventually this game also ended in a draw, as the players kept swapping pieces and entered an opposite colored bishop endgame territory, which just liquidated, and a draw was agreed between Firouzja and Nepomniachtchi. The third game that we're going to be seeing is between Nodirbek Abdusattorov and Deac Bogdan-Daniel. This was the longest game of the round, which started off as a Ruy Lopez, which quickly went into the open Spanish variation that we have been seeing in this tournament from multiple players with the black pieces. So we entered the main line, bishop goes to e3, and then pawn goes to c3. So white plays the move queen e2, perhaps with the idea to put the rook on d1 and then put the pressure on the d5 pawn. Knight went to a5, bishop drops to c2, queen e7, knight d2, knight takes on d2, knight takes on d2, rook e8, open file is grabbed by the black rook. Rook goes to e1, queen goes f7, queen goes to f3, getting out of the file, and the bishop goes to e5, offering a queen trade, which was declined by white after the move queen to d1. Black drops the bishop back to f6, knight goes to b3, offering the trade of the knights, which was declined, attacking the bishop on e3 and the pawn on b2. White goes knight c5, ignoring those threats, and black plays the move g6. Knight takes b2 could have been possible, but after queen to b1, that would attack the pawn on h7 as well as the knight on b2, and that's why black did not choose to go for this position, because this would be very, very dangerous for black. So instead he played the move g6 with the idea to take on b2, since this bishop is now blocked and cannot be attacking the pawn on h7. Rook b1 defending the pawn on b2, knight takes e3 and rook takes e3. In this position, we see that black has the bishop pair advantage, but it's not going to be lasting too long, since the bishops are under attack, especially the bishop on e6. So black is already willing to give up the bishop pair, which white has not taken it. But now, after the trade is offered from black, white does not really have a choice to trade the bishops. And white actually did get a slightly favorable position, but it's not really sufficient to win the game. So players quickly traded off some more pieces, and black had to play the move queen c6. They cannot play the move c4 with the idea to have a double attack on the queen and the knight, because of the move queen d5, that would be check. So that's why black did not want any of this to happen. They played queen c6 first with the idea to play the move c4, which was responded by queen to f3. After the rook went to f8, queen goes to e3, putting pressure on c5, and that led to a bunch of trades, and now we have an endgame where white is slightly on the favorable side, since this pawn is not going to be able to go any further, and white has a majority on the king side, which white kept pressing and almost achieved something, because Deac once again was in severe time pressure. He had 1 minute left on the clock, as opposed to Nodirbek's 8 minutes in this position. So Nodirbek really shuffled around, did improve his position as much as he could, and forced some tough decisions for black, like the move that we're going to be seeing very shortly, which was going to happen very soon here. And then after he played knight e5, in this position, black was forced somewhat to play the move g5, and in this situation white could have tried to press a little bit more, but Deac really did a good job defending, now finally creating some counterplay with the d-pawn, sacrificing the pawn on h6, but unfortunately this is not enough, since the d-pawn is very, very dangerous. So Nodirbek decided to repeat the position, a very solid hold by Deac Bogdan-Daniel, who did not make any critical mistakes on the time pressure, and managed to hold the draw against Nodirbek Abdusattorov. The next game that we're going to be seeing is between Maxime Vachier-Lagrave and Wesley. So MBL opens up the game with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6 and bishop c4. We have the Italian game on the board. Bishop c5, c3, knight f6, d3, and we have a very standard main line played by both sides. This is all theory, and black plays this move a4, gaining some space on the queen side, perhaps trying to go a3 in the future, but main idea is to prevent white from playing the move a4 themselves. So knight went to f1, bishop goes to d7, pawn goes to d4, bishop b6, and knight goes to g3. Wesley was playing relatively quickly. He has more time than he started with, whereas MBL is taking his time, trying to decide which option he wants to go for instead. And after knight takes d4, this was the first moment Wesley actually had to think, and played the move knight e5. Bishop dropped to f1, knight went to g6, knight went to f3, offering the trade of bishops. And Wesley, after spending almost 25 minutes, he took the pawn on e4, which white captured back. Rook takes, bishop takes b6. Black is up a pawn, but that's going to be temporary as the white queen picks up the d6 pawn. Bishop goes to c6, rook went to d1, protecting the queen, and soon players decided to go for a queen trade, and then a little bit more trades. And although white looks like they're slightly favorable, this position is pretty evenly balanced, and that's why white did not really have too much to offer in this position, although he kept trying and trying. But then we had the rook endgame, which is very solid for black. The only weakness black has is the pawn on b5, which is not sufficient to win the game. White does need to create a second weakness, but it's not going to be easy at all, and he was not able to do so. So players eventually traded down into a they actually didn't trade down. They actually went straight into it and made the repetition. So they traded into a rook endgame, but that was the final endgame, and they just repeated the position. Perhaps they could have tried doing some other things, but I think both sides were happy with the draw, and they just repeated the position, and that was it. The final game that we're going to be looking at is between Gukesh and Anish Giri, which started off with d4, knight f6, c4, e6, it3, bishop b4, and e3. Another Nimzo Indian with e3 played in this tournament. Short castles, bishop d3, d5, a3, bishop takes, pawn takes, bishop takes, and this is another very typical line played at this high level. f4, Gukesh is clearly showing intentions that he wants to attack Anish Giri and catch up on the leader, but Anish is a very, very solid player, and he's not going to go down so easily. After queen c3, Gukesh plays this move rook to a2, and we have a very exciting position, but definitely both sides are familiar with this, since this is no new territory. And in this position, Anish spent around 30 plus minutes and played the move rook a d8, to which Gukesh replied very quickly with the move rook d2, and Anish played this move queen to e3, and this was the first big thing from Gukesh. Here he played the move rook f3, but there was a very interesting move with the move e5 attacking this knight. If the knight goes somewhere that is not g4, that's the correct move. For example, if he goes knight d5, the idea is that white can play the move rook to c2, trapping the queen, since the queen cannot find shelter on d4, due to the move bishop takes h7, sacrificing the bishop and then picking up the queen on the next move. So knight d5 would not be possible, and the knight is under attack, so black would be forced to play this move knight g4. If white were to take this knight on g4, this would not be good for white, since black can respond with rook takes d3, so knight g4 is a move to distract the queen on d1 from the defense of the bishop on d3. So after e5, knight g4, in this position white has this interesting option, bishop takes h7, check, sacrificing the bishop. And after the king takes, a very important intermediate move, queen c2 check. Perhaps the idea is after rook takes d8, this would be a losing blunder, as after knight to f2 check, white is forced to take the knight, because if they played the move king to g1, we have the very famous smothered knight happening, and that would be the end of the game, and that would be a brutal blow. So of course white would have to take, but after queen takes, black is threatening checkmate on g2, and that would just end the game right off the bat. So rook takes d8 would not be possible, instead white would have to play the move queen c2 check, and after the knight blocks, they have to play the move rook takes d8. rook takes d8. And here black has this amazing move, rook takes d8, just sacrificing the queen, because after bishop takes e3, knight takes e3, and the move like queen c7, attacking the bishop as well as the rook, black can play the move bishop takes g2 check. And after king g1, they play this fantastic move, rook to d2, and the position is in fact somehow balanced. According to the engine, and the position is really complicated. Black has all sorts of ideas of taking the rook on f1, taking the pawn on f4, or sometimes going knight h4, knight f3, so the position is very confusing, but technically it is balanced. But none of that happened in the game. Gukesh played the move rook f3, queen dropped to c5, bishop went to b2, knight goes to g6, and in this position black is up an extra pawn, so white has to prove the reason. They might have a compensation while they are shuffling at the moment. Shuffling, and a few pieces were traded off, but at this point, when time was ticking down, both players found the repetition and the game was agreed to a draw. So we had 5 draws, a couple of them were very exciting and the other ones were a little bit more solid. So after these games, the standings did not change, so we can go right into it and take a look at it once again.
Thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to give us a like and subscribe.